Hello, you're watching Wareham here at WCTV with me, your host, the Queen Banda. Today, we're going to be discussing about opium addiction, since it is Opium Awareness Month. With me in the studio is Fran Bradshaw, yes, from a clinic in East Wareham, and also Miss Melody Conway, who is a strong advocate here in Wareham, and you have done a lot of work towards helping the cause and towards raising awareness. So I will stop with the introductions right here. I would let you ladies introduce yourselves even furthermore.
Okay, I'm Fran Bradshaw.
Yeah.
I'm the clinic director at East Wareham CTC. We're a methadone clinic,
Yes.
Designed to help addicts withdraw safely,
Yes.
and long-term from opiates. We treat about 500 patients every year. The program is very successful in that it provides the length of time and the comfort for people to withdraw safely.
Thank you.
And I'm Melody Conway. I have lived in town my whole life and raised my children here. I started the Brent Hastings Memorial Fund when my son passed away in March of 2014 as an opportunity to raise awareness and funds to support recovery for folks that are struggling with their addiction.
Yes. Victims who are suffering from any type of addiction. You can say personally, it's hard to see somebody going through that, and I would imagine the people who are going through that, it's even harder. And it seems like this is a big problem in our nation, and it's even a bigger problem here in our town, Wareham. We have facts to show it, that we still have a long journey ahead of us. You mentioned that you treat about 500 people in your clinic. I'm happy that they come, but at the same time, that shows that that's way too many. That's 500 way too many.
Yes.
According to the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, in a report in 2016, they said that in 2015 there were 1,531 deaths related to opium overdose, and that was 18% over from what it was in 2014, and it is 41% over from what it was in 2013. So these are ugly numbers, and it shows that we are kind of going up, you know. So what would you say about that? What are these numbers really telling us?
Well, I think it's a pervasive problem, and people are just starting to look at it now. It's always been a pervasive problem.
Yes.
But people are starting younger and younger. We're in the clinic, we're seeing people older and older who are coming in from prescription drug use. People are being prescribed medication that they're not aware of and not talked about. And then 3 weeks later, they have an addiction that they didn't plan on.
Yes.
I think the access to medication has grown.
Yes.
Yeah, I think society is extremely stressful too, and I think that we need to be aware that people need alternate ways to cope without using drugs or alcohol. And I think it's easy because it's so available. I think people resort to drugs much more quickly than they ordinarily would.
And we will get back to the point of how these drugs are very easily to get. But let me open the floor to Ms. Conway. You have suffered a tragic, and you lost a young son. And according to the report you gave to Wareham Week, and you said that my story and our story, your son, have been told many, many times. But you said your true understanding really began in 2011. When your son was going through this. What do you have to say about this? What was his way to getting into opioids and so forth?
His was a story that was very typical in our society today, in that he had a legitimate injury, was prescribed an opiate-based pain medication to manage that, and just was never able to break free from it. So what's happening is this readily accessible, opiate-based pain meds has introduced a tremendous group of of our society to
Yes.
something they never would have touched.
Yeah.
And there are many that have a brain trigger
Yes.
that is then switched, and
Yeah.
it becomes a horrible blanket of shame and pain and suffering. You know, and in 2011, you know, Brent's situation had escalated to the point where he was resorting to theft to support his habit, and that's when it really came truly aware. I had to pull my head out of the sand,
Yes.
if you will,
Yeah.
and acknowledge that there was a severe problem. And at that point, it was really difficult to find
Yes.
opportunities for recovery for him. So.
And you mentioned a few things. You mentioned that you know, it makes a person turn to this person that they're really not. I mean, I'm sure your son was a wonderful, wonderful young man, and you mentioned that when he turned to theft and all of that, that became kind of a wake-up call, because this is not the young man I have raised, you know.
It's
And
not who he was.
Yeah.
He was a loving, caring, and giving person. He
Yes.
his friends loved him dearly.
Yeah.
Outside of the family, I constantly heard how
Yes.
wonderful he was
Yeah.
and how much people enjoyed having him around. So it became a point of having to learn to hate the disease,
Yes.
love the child,
Yes.
and find that young man back. I knew he was in there, you know, and when he would surface, it was a wonderful time, in a constant state of fear
Yes.
that we would lose him again. And eventually we ultimately lost him. And so it's, for us as a family, our way of honoring his life and his struggle is why we do what we do with raising funds and trying to do our part
Yes.
in keeping this dark conversation
Yes.
and drag it out into the light, because people need to talk about it.
Yes.
We need to talk about
absolutely.
it. The stigma itself causes so many to not seek recovery.
Yes. According to CDC, the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, in a report they released in 2016 titled CDC Guideline for Prescribing Opioids for Chronic Pain in the United States, they say that opioid pain medication use presents serious risk, including overdose and opioid use disorder. And also they say that from 1999 to 2014, more than 165,000 people have died because of this. And there is a correlation between the increase of the sales of opioid and the death. Now, this is just an ugly truth. Should there be stricter rules towards prescribing the opioids medicine to patients in the hospitals?
I'm involved with the Falmouth Police Department, who looked at this issue very closely. We worked with the ER docs in Falmouth Hospital, who feel that because of the work that they do, their focus is to alleviate pain immediately, and they don't have enough time to assess who isn't and who is appropriate for pain medication. So we developed a training for dentists and physicians and ER doctors around the use of pain medication and addiction. Even though a person is an addict, it doesn't mean that they don't have the right for pain medication, but the judicious use of it and the short-term prescription of it is something that needs to be addressed. The state is now looking at it as well. They have an online site that they utilize to see who is being prescribed what, and they're monitoring this closely, and they're monitoring the doctors closely as well to look at who's prescribing what, how much, and how frequently. So there's a start.
Definitely. You have something to add into this?
Well, I do. I have come to blame the pharmaceutical industry for the increase in addiction and opiate overdoses. And as your numbers prove, that's just it's a plain fact.
Yes.
So we need to change the dynamic of our society as well, because we are a society of fix it today, fix it now. I don't want to be where I am right this minute. So you walk into the doctor with an expectation of having things immediately fixed. So I think society needs to dial back some and make sure that they're fully understanding what they're doing. And I think that prescriptions to young children need to be very carefully chosen, and parents need to advocate more for their children in limiting what they're given. There's a way to manage pain without the quick fix. Not saying that some folks don't need it, but I think it's become they're handing it out like candy. Not so much anymore. It is coming around some,
Yes.
but back even 9-10 years ago,
Yes.
you could walk into any ER and walk out with a prescription. And so I think that, again, raising awareness, continuing these conversations is helping to stem that tide a little bit.
Yes. Speaking of raising awareness, in a statement once again by Wareham Week, you said that we are not there yet, and that is the sad truth, that we are not there yet. When we're speaking about the stigma that really makes many people, many victims, hide in closed doors and not seek the help, where do you think the stigma is, and what is the stigma, and where does it come from?
The stigma that is surrounding the opiate addiction problem is that these people are a throwaway portion of society now. That once they've fallen into this trap, they don't deserve the second and third and fourth chance that sometimes it might take for them to find long-term recovery. I had this conversation at my golf tournament with my 130 guests. There are words that we no longer use in society to describe social groups because they're inappropriate and hurtful. And why is the word junkie still okay? And if I never hear the word junkie again, that would be a happy day for me. Why is it okay to talk about this social group of people who are struggling and suffering, either inadvertently or intentionally? It doesn't matter. Why is it okay to throw them in a hole and label them? I'm tired of labels. I'm really tired of labels. So that's the dilemma. And I think that blanket of stigma becomes a very heavy cloak for some folks, and they will not seek help because they are ashamed.
And it's not only the opiate addict that suffers from this shame. It's a shame-based disease. I think when people try to stop and they can't, they feel that there's something inherently wrong with them. It's something that they should be able to control. And what happens to someone when they're addicted and they're involved in crime, and it's shown on television, and they're acting in ways that they ordinarily wouldn't, and they're being motivated by a chemical brain, that only reinforces the public's view of who an addict really is. You don't get that with someone who's suffering from long-term cancer or diabetes or any of the other diseases that are socially acceptable. This is a disease.
Yes.
And we need to recognize it as such.
Wow. Yes, it's about time we recognize it as a disease. And you mentioned that it's not necessarily that do people not want to overcome it. And when they don't overcome it, they look at within themselves like there's something wrong with them, and the battle becomes even tougher because,
Right.
Why can't I get out of this situation? I know it's very bad. Why can't I get it out of it? And it comes basic down to addiction. It's an addictive
That's right.
situation. When I was looking at the different stages of recovery, there's 2 stages. And the first stage is like the physical recovery where you're puking and all that, physical symptoms. But I read that the post-acute stage is actually much tougher. In post-acute, it can come to you in different ways, You can have a little break and then it comes back to you, and then, if you're not prepared, you go back to it. How do you help victims in your clinic to understand this and to cope with this?
Well, there is that acute phase where people are in withdrawal.
Yes.
And we can help them become less physically dependent on their drug of choice. Then there's the recovery period that can last years. It's not a 30-day fix. It could be a lifetime. And people are at risk for relapse without sufficient supports to relapse at any time. We identify what it is that caused and supported the addiction to continue, and that may be different for every person. We have people who come into the clinic, they have histories of trauma and abuse. We have people who come into the clinic who don't have histories of trauma and abuse. We have people come in with a mental illness. We have people come in who don't have a mental illness. But the longer the disease is rampant, the more cost it incurs. People become homeless. People have problems with the law. People lose families. They lose their jobs. We try to put all of those back together over a period of time. So there's less chance of relapse when that happens.
Did the same situation happen to your son in terms of like relapsing, that he's trying to get clean and then things
Absolutely,
happen?
yes. He got through the physical part of detox, if you will. And he was really doing well. He was back to work. He was, surrounded by loving friends and family and coming for dinner. And, we had a wonderful, I was in a very happy place. And I don't know what, none of us ever really know what a trigger is. But clearly something triggered his need to use, and unfortunately, due to the shame and stigma, he was alone when he passed. So there was no Narcan, there was no hope of reaching him in time. So it was a very frustrating place to be, because we didn't quite, you'll never understand that motivation. I think that long-term recovery comes with a tremendous support network. I wish we could have done things done things differently, but you can't go back. All I can do is move forward and try to, again, advocate for more long-term programs. I think we need more halfway houses and sober houses, which give folks a structured environment to regain their life and their world. Again, it's that stigma that every time someone talks about opening a sober house or a halfway house, everybody gets up in arms, not in my backyard. You're not going to put a bunch of thieves and junkies on my street. That's the dilemma. And what people need to step back and recognize is these are human beings that really, truly want their life back. They'll be living in a structured environment with that drug testing, meetings, and a support network around them. That's needed. That's tremendously needed. You can't just go back to your old life and expect things to be okay, because they're not.
I sense that an interview in Wicked Local, our police chief, Wareham police chief, Kevin Walsh, stated that the issue about the drug issue in our community has to do with economic base. That as long as there's going to be a supply and demand and sales, the issue is still going to be available. I mean, what are programs maybe in the clinic or to help the public to actually stop using the drugs, period? Because I feel like that will eliminate all the drug use and will eliminate even drug sellers into our community.
Well, there's a program such as ours, the medicated assisted program. There's outpatient counseling. There's several agencies within the area. There's Gosnell and High Point and other places where patients can go for outpatient treatment. But I would agree that we need more sober houses and long-term rehab. Years ago, we had halfway houses that the insurance companies would pay for up to 6 months. They no longer do that. This is a long-term disease that needs a long-term approach. It isn't going to be fixed overnight. It isn't going to be fixed in a year. These are long-term problems that people incur. We need long-term solutions. So I think partnering with other community members, insurance companies, families, other providers is the key. It takes a village in order to address an individual's needs. And we need to come together to figure out solutions and who's going to pay for those solutions as well.
You mentioned payments, and I know that payments cost could be a major factor in terms of whether I should get the help or not get the help, because it is a lot of money.
Yeah.
How are you helping to make sure that the person does get the help instead of focusing on the cost?
We don't turn away anyone. If they qualify for funds, the state will pick up the tab. So the insurance companies do pay for medicated assisted treatment, and if they do not, then the state will pick up that treatment. However, they don't pay for residential treatment, long-term rehab, and that's what's needed. We can do what we can do, but to provide over the long term, and it is a long-term disease, we need people to be able to pay, or providers to step up and start to pay for these longer-term rehabs.
And that's what you were mentioning before of this middle houses that we need from coming out of clinic to getting their lives together.
Yeah.
Correct. I can have a fundraiser and raise, $12,000, $13,000 every year. It's a drop in the bucket.
Yes.
It's a drop in the bucket. I didn't have the bandwidth the first 2 years to manage any of the funds locally. We gave everything to the Heron Project. Chris Heron is doing wonderful work in the communities all across the country. This year I wanted to keep some funds local so that we can assist someone who needs a couple of weeks rent in their sober house because they're still trying to get their feet under them and they haven't gotten the job yet. But it's $150 a week to be in a sober house, and just the one my son was in, he was paying more rent weekly, not food included, just rent for a bed that a bedroom shared and a bunk, than I pay for rent to live where I live. That's just insanity. And again, you come out of recovery, out of the detox, you go into the sober house, best of intentions, wanting to be successful, and the odds are against you. You don't have a job. Frequently you have a felony conviction with a drug felony conviction, which means you don't have a driver's license. You don't, how are you supposed to pay for that? And families are so burdened in our efforts to support these adult children frequently in their efforts for recovery. It's a vicious cycle. We need to break and find more ways, creative funding, insurance companies to step up and assist with these long-term care solutions, because in the end, it is less expensive to treat them than it is to support the medical and social issues that come out from the backside of it.
Well, thank you, ladies, both of you, for coming in. It was not an easy topic to talk about, but we both stated clearly that it is one to be talked about. We need education, more of this education to reach the public.
Yes.
The families who are going through it, to prepare them that there's something such as relapse, something such as triggers. We do not know what the triggers are, but to prepare you when they happen, so to understand what they are going through. And hopefully through this show or this particular program right here today, people will be able to get more information, get out of their way to really see that this is a community issue rather than it's somebody else's issue, because you never know when it's going to happen to you.
That's right.
Following with that, there will be a public event that all the public is invited, hosted by Toby Hospital, and they're going to be hosting the discussion about opioid crisis and how it's affecting the community. And that discussion is going to be on the 29th of this month. So thank you both for coming to our studio. I learned a lot, and I hope our audiences at home have too.
Thank you for having me.
us.
Well, thank you so much for watching WCTV. You watched Wareham with me, your host, Queen Vanda. Please tune in next week as we host more discussions about various upcoming events affecting our community and also our country in general. So with that, I say have a lovely day. Bye.